All right. So this presentation is a report from the ADHD 2023 conference in Baltimore last year. I got to present on stage with Dr. William Dodson, who, if anybody does not know who he is essentially the pioneer of tracking down this thing we call RSD now, and also pioneering treatment protocols, prescription protocols, and diagnostic protocols. So for me, he has been a big influence in my life, even before I ever met him. So we agreed to work on a presentation together last May when the conference committee asked us to do it. And we feverishly worked over the weekend of 3 days to get the abstract in, got the acceptance, and then promptly didn't talk to each other for 3 months because I was too scared to reach out to him. And somebody pointed out to me that he could have reached out to me too, but I didn't see it that way. So once we started working together, we worked weekly, probably from the beginning of September until right up to our presentation at the conference on December 12th. And I thought I had done a pretty good job over the last 5 years doing a deep dive, researching this subject and becoming an expert. I felt like I was an expert. I felt like I knew quite a bit. And the whole point of this presentation was to explore and present the difference between what a clinician or a researcher who doesn't have ADHD, what they see versus what people with ADHD feel. There's no way for somebody who doesn't have it to understand exactly what we feel and exactly what's going on inside of our bodies. And so I thought that I was here to help him understand. And I mean, he just showed up because he's a nice guy. What I learned, I'll do the Tonight Show's top 10 things I learned while working with Bill Dodson. He did not coin the term rejection sensitive dysphoria. That is listed in many, many articles out there. It's listed on Attitude Magazine. It's referenced on Psychology Today, Healthline, you name it. Any place you see it and he's mentioned, it says he coined the term, and he did not. He discovered the term used in some research that he found when he first started researching it in the early 2000s. And it was coined by some Harvard Medical School students who were researching this concept of emotional dysregulation that was so painful, it was dysphoric, related specifically to ADHD. It didn't get scooped up in any of the official diagnostics, so it kind of was I think he said it was in the 60s. And so it kind of got lost for a while until he discovered it. It is, I also learned, number 9, that it is sensitive and not sensitivity. And I'll tell you why we get confused on that, right? And why everybody is confused on that. We'll hit that on the next slide, I think. He researched RSD for 10 years before, as he said, had enough guts to present it publicly in Seattle at essentially a precursor to Seattle CHAD was, I forget what it was called, maybe ADHD Resources at the University of Washington is where he got invited to talk about it. And he spoke on it. He wasn't sure what was going to happen. And at the end of, and of course, this was back in the days of in-person presentations. After, I think the format is that there would be a speaker, and they had people like Sari Solden, Gabor Mate, you name it. Those people flew to Seattle and spoke at this Seattle community. After the speaker spoke, then everybody did a breakout session where different groups would go into different conference rooms at the university. Might have the parents would go off into one conference room. You'd have the men go into another conference room if they weren't parents. And, all the different people would go, the different generations, whatever people had in common, they would go into a different conference room to go talk about the topic or whatever they wanted to talk about. And then the speaker would always go into their own conference room, and anybody that had like questions afterwards, they could go into that conference room and they could ask the speaker a question. Typically, when a speaker went into a conference room, nobody followed them in there. When Bill went into this conference room, everybody followed him in there. It was not only standing room only, people were pouring out into the hallway, and they were doing what everybody does when they first learn about this. They were crying and peppering him with questions. And he had no idea that it was going to be so overwhelmingly received by people who suffered from it. And so that encouraged him to start thinking about maybe publishing some of his research, because by then he'd been studying it in his clinic for 10 years, probably 1,000 patients by that time. And it turned out that the powers that be, however the research paper process works, they didn't feel that it was legitimate, and he was oddly rejected, considered a quack.
Wait,
right?
who are these people? His credentials are amazing.
Most of them are part of the APA and the people who write the DSM.
Yeah, well, there's a problem.
Right. And a lot of them are the academics the academic researchers from, all of the peer-reviewed journals. And so not having RSD himself, I'm sure it didn't feel good. Nobody likes to be rejected, right? Or to be told that your life work that seems to be getting such traction with your patients doesn't exist, isn't real, isn't evidence-based, right? But he kept working on it, kept studying it, kept speaking to individuals who have ADHD. And I'll have to go back and see when he first published in Attitude magazine. I don't know if anybody knows that off the top of their head. But he started kind of this grassroots, just publishing to people who have ADHD and getting that kind of support and lift and more information about it. And I love the connection with Seattle, of course. Number 6, he is incredibly busy advocating for us, even though he's retired from clinical practice. I thought that I would be taking time away from his, retirement, his personal time, but it turns out his personal time is spent writing a book, working with other people who are out doing different kinds of clinical research. I mean, it's fascinating how much he's doing. And I was incredibly grateful that he had time for this project. He so doesn't have ADHD. He's in my very visual communication designs, which I almost always communicate in some sort of drawing, whiteboard, it's very difficult for me to actually write something out. And so a lot of my slides, when he encountered my RSD slides, he's like, wow,
Oops.
there's a lot here. It's very bright. It's there are a lot of colors on this, right? Because I mean, it's one of those things where I learned that I have such a I guess an appetite, not even appetite, need for stimulation, that the visual stimulation comes through my designs. And so it was kind of funny. And so at first I got rid of everything. I made everything white, and I got rid of all the graphics because I was ashamed of my highly visual communication designs. Eventually, through getting feedback from other presentations and stuff, I heard, what did you do with your metaphors and your designs? And I like, so the feedback was, and then I had to be brave enough to be able to say, so practice. It turns out we need to compromise here. And this changed so much so to the point that 4 hours before our presentation, he says, okay, great, send me the deck. And I'm like, nope, my need to control, Bill, is going to take precedence over your need to control. So going from September to December, I was able to go from writhing amoeba, afraid of him, to more of a, not really a peer, but somebody who I felt like I knew that he had space for me to stand up for myself.
So Beth,
Yeah, go for it.
this is all impressive. Can we go maybe? I don't know what get you off the phone. Can you go to number one on your list, the bottom one, number one? How you have it? It says not all negative emotional struggles are RSD. Now, emotional deregulation is really a founding thing of ADHD. Maybe his difficulty is with this DSM people and the psychiatrists that write the book. Does, I don't know if you're going to get to it, does RSD fall under the umbrella of ADHD?
Yes,
Maybe you're
that was
coming
an awesome question.
So
So most of the deck and the few slides are about exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah, so number 2 and number 1 lead right into this, and I'm just gonna force you
again,
down.
I don't want to get you, I don't want to make you skip anything.
No, it's good. Sometimes it's good to know what's coming.
So, but this falls under, you can kind of see this connect, I guess we're going to make this connection between ADHD and RSD. And ADHD is in the manual of DSM. That's my go-to thing when people deny it. Oh, ADHD isn't real. I go, it's in the book. It's code number 314 point blah, blah, blah. It's in the book. I go.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, it's it is interesting, just it's so completely left out of so much, even though it is in the book, right? Our whole presentation was about our different perspectives. Go ahead.
To me, we're continuing to battle because we allow the DSM to dictate. This ADHD should not be, they dictate because they created it for them. Fine for them to have their little bit, but what they're trying to construct is something that doesn't take emotional stuff into account, from what I've read over and over and what Bill Dotson has spoken to as well. So it's time for us to actually have our own manual, which supersedes these guys. They're for the insurance companies and for all that junk, you know.
Yeah.
So we need to be in control, and we need to be able, but we need to do it in, as Bill would do, Dotson would do, which is scientific, not an ADHD, oh, this emotional thing, but it's like, we need to have it where it's data backed, where we have real information and it's powerful. But it's over and over. It's this darn DSM group, which takes things out because they want to be able to document, you know, and they can't get emotions.
Yeah, and I mean, the DSM, I mean, is as frustrating as it can be. And I'm actually gonna punt questions until for just a little bit longer. I promise there's not too much longer, but the DSM, for as frustrating as it is, it's understandable in that it is from 2013, and then it was based on 10 years of research. So it's almost 20 years old, even, right? And there's some updates that have happened. They're still not enough. We're going to talk more about this. Hang on there, though. The different perspectives, I'm just going to keep plowing right down and pulling you guys down this dirt road.
So what are we doing tonight, though? What are we're going down this, or what's the kind of capsule here?
I think I'm not going fast enough. That's what it sounds like. Let me go a little bit faster. We are at number 4. Okay. So part of this was a report from the conference and learning some things about ADHD and RSD that most of us won't find out there. So the different perspectives, right? So Bill has his clinician and his researcher perspective, but he doesn't have ADHD. And I was bringing my lived experience to it. That, as much as we were open-minded to each other's position and perspective, we disagreed a lot, and we both learned a lot. Even though everything that I have said, he never became obstinate, rude, dismissive. He never rejected anything that I brought to the table. So it speaks to the type of person that he is. His number one go-to, which I did not know, for finding good providers was communities like Seattle Chad, because the directories aren't being kept up to date fast enough. And the thing that was the most shocking to me, and that was one of our first arguments, is when I was talking about something that I thought was an RSD episode, and he's like, no, that's emotional dysregulation. And I had no idea what he meant. And it took several discussions before I actually figured it out, what he was talking about. And we ended up putting a lot of that into the presentation because everybody thinks everything is underneath the rejection sensitive dysphoria umbrella. So here we go. This is his researching since 2004. Not his researching. This is if you search, if you look at the results of people searching on RSD for all time that Google Trends tracked. And the search terms are ADHD, RSD, adding on the term I'm ADHD because there's a muscular condition called RSD. Rejection, you can't see it here because it's truncated, but rejection sensitivity dysphoria and rejection sensitive dysphoria. So the reason why I'm showing this is that the blue line is sensitive. This is the term that Dodson started using in his work. But in 2017, Reddit took an Attitude Magazine article and reposted it on Reddit, and they reposted it under the title Rejection Sensitivity. And that thing went viral. And you can see why we think it's rejection sensitivity now. So it doesn't really matter, but everybody wants to know which one it is.
Well, for tracking it, it does matter. If it's gone, yeah, you wouldn't be tracking correctly if everyone's going with that.
Right. When I showed this to Bill, he was shocked. And he said, I have to show my editor this because they keep saying sensitive, and they were wondering why the search trends weren't taking off. And so this gave him the answer why. All right.
So you gave him a gift.
I gave him a lot of gifts.
Yeah, no, that's good. Excellent.
and he for me. So a lot of people want to know if ADHD is an ADHD thing only.
RSD? You mean RSD?
Yeah, sorry, RSD. Thank you. Um, and Bill thinks it's possibly only an ADHD thing. There's plenty of people out on the internet who thinks it's also associated with autism and possibly dyslexia. So sometimes it's hard to pull it apart, but I'm not going to read the slide. It's a component or subtype, and it's very difficult to manage in the moment. And a lot of what we'll talk about is how to kind of prepare or make life easier with it. So ADHD is intense on both sides, both with negative emotions and positive emotions. But nobody goes to the doctor because you're too happy. And so this is what gets studied. I mean, people within positive psychology are starting to study this over the last 15, 20 years, but mostly it's about the negative emotions, right? And the difference between ADHD emotions and other mood disorder emotions is that our emotions are exactly the same and our moods are the same given the circumstances. We are sad when things are sad. We are angry when when frustration is there. It's very similar to the same thing as neurotypical response. The difference is that we are just on a different I'm going to say spectrum, but I think you all know what I mean. Different between like Celsius and Fahrenheit, right? Yeah, and some of us might even be on Kelvin. But it's the same way to measure. It's just that it's just the intensity, the volume is just turned way up. All right. So out there in the community, we have, and these are good people, Barkley, Reimer, Farone. This is how they see what they call emotional dysregulation. And I find words for clinicians and researchers. And I know that, as TikTok and other social media educates the rest of us, it becomes less daunting, but a lot of people understand that there are words, but they don't necessarily know exactly what they mean or why they're used in a clinical or research setting. So I use ADHD emotionality as the umbrella term, but it's essentially ADHD emotional dysregulation. Barkley talks about it. It's impulsive. It's inability to self-soothe. It's inability to put your attention where it needs to be. It is an inability to substitute better things to do, all these things. Reimer thinks more about temper outbursts, rapid mood swings, overreactivity. Farone is about rages, irritability, temper outbursts. This is where I learned from Bill that just because I'm irritable or just because I'm irritable quickly doesn't mean it's an RSD response. And I was using RSD as an umbrella term. It turns out that there are 3 types of emotional dysregulation with ADHD. This column here is Bill's. He's not labeling it Dodson, annoyingly, but nobody has considered the speed, the suddenness of the onset. The emotion might be too great for anyone to handle. Like if a neurotypical person had the degree or the intensity of what our emotions are, it would be difficult for them to handle. And then there's the matter of degree. And this is where a lot of us will get frustrated because we'll try to talk about it. And then we will hear from friends and family, well, I don't like rejection either. Nobody, everybody gets frustrated, right? And then we feel like we're being gaslit or not heard. But it's a matter of degree of how this affects us. So the 3 types, unsatisfyingly called emotional dysregulation. And that is like our quick tempers, our quick swings to amazement at how amazing some beautiful thing is. The immense emotions that we have, the highs, but there's not necessarily pain associated. That what's missing here is the dysphoria. And a lot, 2/3 of people with ADHD who take stimulants, this type of emotional dysregulation responds well. And so it tempers this irritability, this quickness to some of the negative emotions. Then there's rejection sensitivity. Everybody is on some sort of a spectrum as to how they feel about rejection. And there are people who are very insensitive to rejection. And then there's most people, the neurotypicals, are kind of in the middle. Nobody likes it, but it doesn't feel good. The difference for this is that it evidently doesn't respond to medication. So while one type, the emotional dysregulation, responds to stimulant medication, the other side, rejection sensitive dysphoria, responds to alpha agonists about 60% of the time. So the difference is that people with ADHD have all 3, and sometimes it's really difficult to tell which one it is. Now, this is where we can end up going from doctor to doctor to doctor, trying different medications, different treatments, but they're not really working. And so one of the things that I learned from Bill was if you treat ADHD and RSD first,
Then you can deal.
you can find out if the person has ADHD or not. If you give them a stimulant and it doesn't solve for their symptoms, then they probably don't have ADHD, right? But if they do have ADHD and it solves their symptoms, then it peels away the Venn diagram from these other ones, right? So there are clinical depression, clinical anxieties, borderline, and bipolar. And depending on who you've seen and been diagnosed, like general practitioners will typically diagnose somebody with ADHD with depression or anxiety. And, part of it is because they've had no training with ADHD. And part of it is because of how we talk about our symptoms in their office. I have racing thoughts. I feel anxious. I'm really depressed. Well, they aren't digging in underneath this stuff. And so what Bill will ask his patients is, tell me about these baseless fears that you have, because that is what anxieties are, is they are baseless fears about the future. And depression is typically long, 2 weeks at a time. There's no real trigger. It's a gradual onset down into the depression, lasting for more than 2 weeks. RSD is fast. It goes away relatively fast. And it's in the moment, and it isn't about the future. borderline, completely different, presents differently. Typically, if you get diagnosed with borderline or bipolar, you probably are seeing a psychiatrist, but not an ADHD psychiatrist, right? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but this is where a lot of people end up with antidepressants or bipolar meds or anti-anxiety meds when it just masks and brings on other unpleasant symptoms in addition to also not dealing with the ADHD. I'm not a doctor, so I can't really go very deep on any of these, but I like to show that. Okay, so we've talked about this, it's what clinicians and researchers see when they observe us. And then there's what it feels from the inside out. One of the things that I said to Bill was, when you talk about perceived slights, Bill, you are triggering me because I feel like you are rejecting what's actually going on inside of me. And he wanted to know more about that. And I said, well, when you say I'm impulsive, I understand that's a clinical term, but from my point of view, you're telling me that it is a behavior that I'm not controlling. And he talks about ADHD and RSD being a physiological, RSD specifically being a physiological response to a trigger. And I got him on board with the idea of, if it is a physiological response, is it like a sneeze when you encounter an allergen? Because he talks about how alpha agonists aren't like Benadryl. He didn't say that, but you can't just take them when you're in an episode. It's too late. You need to build up the armor. And so I got him to agree that it's like the difference between Benadryl or the allergy meds like Claritin, Zyrtec, that you have to take all the time so that when you encounter an allergen, you have your allergen armor on. It's the same type of thing. So is a sneeze an impulsive behavior that we are not controlling? It isn't any more than our inability to control our amygdala's response to the fight and flight reaction from the trigger. And when we have what we need in the form of a variety of different treatments, and if we're in that lucky 60%, we can benefit from clonidine and guanfacine, then we have the ability to control these impulsive behaviors. But I don't think they're actually behaviors that aren't being controlled. We'll save that for discussion. I've got some discussion questions. Okay. Okay. We started probably 15 minutes late. So I've got the 12 features of RSD. I'm going to post this on my website. We'll have the recording. I'm going to post in our WebEx chat spaces. If anybody has not been set up so that you can be in the chat spaces, email seattle@chad.org and we will get you set up. And so there's that. I think a lot of people have seen this multiple times. It's essentially an RSD episode broken down into 7 phases, parts. And it helps us by understanding what phase we're in. It helps us know what types of things we can do to help us shorten the episode. Why do triggers trigger us? Because this is different than the other mood disorders that I had up. So context is everything. They come from someone or something that matters to us. So if it doesn't matter to you, if a horn honks and it doesn't matter to you, we don't get triggered. Sometimes it triggers you and other times it won't. Is there a power structure with the trigger? Are you able to have any kind of control over, your relationship with the person? The environment where it's happening? Is there a lot of stimulation going on? Is it a trigger from your past? Maybe something, that was traumatic in your past? And what are your reserves? I know that I'm a lot more likely to get triggered if I'm tired or hungry. But more than anything else, for those that live with us, for those who care about us, if they can understand these nuances, they can get a little bit closer to understanding what's going on in the moment when it's happening. All right. These are questions for discussion. We've got, how did you feel when you first heard about RSD and realized it's something you've always had? Which emotions related to rejection and criticism cause the most distress for you? What helps you manage RSD? And what are you most likely to do to help manage your RSD? So I've actually got slides on this later, but let me just see what's next, and then we will get going on that. Rejecting RSD, a kind of weird thing for a doctor to do, but they do. And how to find a provider, directories. Yeah. All right. A lot of you have seen this slide before. These are the three kind of categories of how to find what works best for you. More about that. There is a RSD support guide. There's a QR code. I'll leave this up for a second if anybody wants to get that, but the recording you'll be able to find later. If you just go to bethbardeen.com, there's like a box on the homepage that you can get the support guide. Looks different now because you can print it out and take it to your doctor or your therapist. This is what was handed out at the conference. It was like a little trifold brochure.
It's not coming through.
Oh, it's not working?
I couldn't get the.
Yeah, just, I mean, if you know my name,
Oh,
ad.com another time, and you can have it.
won't happen. Okay,
Yeah, I hear you. All right.
used to be then.
How many do we have? We've got 16 people.
So why did that not work? Because I had my camera, it usually says Chrome
work.
on the bottom, you click on it. So
Yeah, maybe I did something to it to make it not work. Let me see.
Hey, Beth, did you ask me a question? I had to pop over to get my kid to brush his teeth for a second.
No, you're good.
Okay.
Try it again, Sally. It worked. It works for
oh,
me.
I have to turn it upside the other direction.
Huh.
So
I'll
did-
just put it in the chat.
Huh. All right. And that's called, getting the best outcomes. Huh.
All right.
So
So
you
we've
can
got,
just download that? Is that what
Yeah.
this?
yeah, you can download it and print it
On
out.
the page, it goes right to your Beth Bardeen. I'm Beth, and support
Yep.
guide. There you go. Right, good, thank you.
Yeah, I probably should have had that handy, but I don't.
That's right. Shoulds are, oof.
Should have.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right, we've got I think 16 people, is that right? Let's just, you guys want to do just open discussion with the whole group, or do you want to break up into support groups? What do you think, Jessica? Do you want to call that one?
I think 16 is too big for a whole group on Zoom.
Okay. So I will create, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, if you could put the questions that you had up, I'm gonna take a picture of them. So I also, and then maybe we could copy them and put them in the chat for people.
You know, not everyone might have a question. If you want to do the thing where they raise the little yellow hand, that might work for you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, because otherwise, yeah, good point, Eric.
I think it would be good for people to also just share their experiences and stuff. So that's the support group part.
Okay, there we go. There are the questions in the chat. It's kind of a lot.
Perfect.
All right. So as co-host, can you create 2 rooms, Jessica, or and then people can choose, or
Yeah, I can do breakout rooms. And then we can just, let's see here.
Well, it went down to 13 people just now.
oh yeah, while we're waiting, if anybody wants to raise their hand, we can go ahead and
Oh yeah.
we can questions while are they ready?
Should we have the questions up again or what?
They're in the chat.
Yeah.
I
So
can put 'em-
Beth, I don't think it needs to get split into caregivers or all ages necessarily in the
Sounds-
future, just so you know, because that's a different support group. So
That's good.
okay. With 13 people. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna do this, 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 and then sign here.
I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording.